Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Washington State Summercon. This is the Tim Seeley, Larry Hama panel, and a legend and a legend in the making. So that's pretty cool. I'm pretty excited to first meet Larry Hama. I've never met him before, so I'm a little nervous to be really honest. But Larry, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Great to be here.
It's nice to see you here on the West Coast, here in Puyallup, Washington. Have you ever been here before?
Not to Puyallup, I've been to Emerald City a few times.
Yeah. But Puyallup is better.
I very rarely get invited to the West Coast.
Yeah.
This is like a real pleasure for me.
You are missing out, because the West Coast is where it's at.
Well, I only go to cons if I'm invited. I don't do this as a lot of people do it as a living.
Yeah.
But I'm actually still working.
Yes. And we'll be talking about that here in a minute, because something really exciting is going to be happening here in the next few months. And when I heard about it, I was like, that's about time. So I think you guys probably know what I'm talking about. Image is relaunching. They now have the license to G.I. Joe and Transformers, and they're relaunching G.I. Joe and Transformers along with some other name titles like Duke and Cobra Commander, I believe, some individual ones. So, and this gentleman right here is going to be writing G.I. Joe again for Image Comics, so it's very exciting.
Well, it's Image Skybound.
Image Skybound, that's correct, Skybound.
I've already written 4 issues.
Nice.
So I'm up to 3 or 4.
I'm excited. And it takes off, it's a legacy number, correct?
Yeah, it's the numbering is from the first, continuous from the first issue of that novel, and it's the storyline is continuous.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. Everybody, Tim Seeley's here as well. So now we got our full panel.
Okay. I'm gonna fight my way through some Star Trekkies.
There you go.
All right, sorry. Yeah, you don't need, nobody needs to hear me read. Yeah.
But let's go ahead and first start off with Tim. I'm actually going to ask you some questions, because there's some current books that you're working on right now that I'm fairly familiar with. The first one I want to talk about is Money Shot.
Yes.
And this, if you guys aren't familiar with this book, it's not for kids.
It is the NSFW.
Yes.
Yes.
And this is the second volume. And if you want to kind of give us a synopsis of this book, that'd be great.
All right, let me just make sure. Okay, so I'll do the general audience synopsis. The synopsis is, in the near future, there is a group of scientists who discover a method for traversing the universe, but it is extremely expensive, and it's called Money Shot because it costs so much. So to fund it, because there's no funding for science, they shoot porn with aliens and run around the universe. So yeah, there you go.
So is this something you've always wanted to do?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. But I always wanted to do adult comics, but not like just sex. When I was a kid, you could sneak, issues of like Cherry and some of these independent comics that were smart adult comics. So they would do sex stuff, but as long as you were being subversive, you could also do something that was kind of, a parody or satire. So I pitched the book to every publisher, and everyone turned me down except Vault. And they said, hell yes. But it was very successful. We're on our 4th volume of the book. We just started one. It's called Money Shot Comes Again. It just came out like 2 weeks ago, but 2 issues are out.
Yeah. And the gentlemen, 2 brothers who own Vault Comics, they like stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean, because this is the real mainstream is this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of women read this comic, and a lot of people buy it in trade that wouldn't normally go into a comic shop necessarily. So Amazon has an entire section for people writing like I banged Bigfoot in the McDonald's parking lot. Like there's whole genres of books. It's probably a real title. I didn't even probably make that one up. But that stuff is like the real mainstream. That's beyond superheroes and beyond the kind of thing that tends to sell to the Wednesday Warriors. This kind of stuff is the real mainstream. So this I've always wanted to do something like this, and it's funny and it's sexy, but it's also got an edge to it. So the current arc is about how the billionaires had a space race to try to get their own vehicle into space, and they blew each other up. And so there's no billionaires left on Earth, but they stole all our water and a lot of our air when they left. So that's the story.
Well, it's a very fun title. I picked up Volume 1. Like I said, Volume 2 is now out. The subtitle is Come Again.
Yeah, comes again.
Yeah, it comes again.
Very subtle. It's very subtle.
And you got some other books that are out right now. We'll get to those in a minute. We're going to go back to Larry real quick. And Larry, let's go ahead and talk about the Skybound Image G.I. Joe coming out, I believe, in later this year, in a few months. And you already said you are 4 issues in. Can you give us any type of direction where we're going with this? So what are we going to see? I mean, the history with you and G.I. Joe, I mean, that's my childhood. Thank you very much, by the way, for bringing all those characters to life. And I mean, really, it's just enormous. And you too as well, Tim, just so you know, because Tim also with G.I. Joe.
A tiny portion of it, but Larry has done it.
Yeah. But just an awesome universe. And so what are we going to be looking forward to over the next iteration of G.I. Joe?
I can't tell you.
What happens in Puyallup stays in Puyallup. So you can, what happens here stays here. So if you want to share any nuggets at all,
I signed an NDA. So.
But it's going to
It's
be
like when I got out of the Army, they said, everything you can't forget, deny. So, you know, I never said any of that stuff because I'm not particularly crazy about Leavenworth. But I don't know what the penalty is for violating an NDA, but I don't want to find out.
all right. Let's see. If you, what are some of your fondest storylines that you did for G.I. Joe? Since we're not going to be able to hit the new stuff because it's not out yet. We're all excited for it. But what are some of your fondest storylines when your current run with Marvel for G.I. Joe?
It's all one storyline. What are you talking about? It's a continuous storyline from issue 1 to 304. I handed in the plot for number 304 last week. What I can tell you is that it continues from issue 300, which was a cliffhanger.
Yes.
And I resolved the cliffhanger and create new cliffhangers.
We're not going to get a lot. This is little tidbits, but you know what? I'm excited. Is there anything you can tell us at all? Like, how did they contact you when they got the license back for Skybound?
Well, Mr. Kirkman called me directly.
Nice.
He asked me to, he wanted me to do it. And apparently Hasbro wanted me to do it also. So I'm doing it. I'd always do it. It's as long as it's the original continuity. That's
Not the shitty one I drew.
well, I don't know about that because I've never seen it. I've never seen any of the animation, and I've never read any of the other iterations of G.I. Joe because I'm trying to keep my universe intact.
Yeah.
So, like I know that in other iterations they killed off characters and added characters, and that didn't happen.
Yeah.
I think they actually killed off Lady J.
I drew it.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
But she's still kicking in my universe.
Yes.
And I think they added characters and they don't agree. So it's like Cobra Law doesn't exist in my universe either.
Oh. Cobra Law fans. Well, I don't want to eat up too much of your guys' time because I know the audience probably has some questions for you because there's a lot of G.I. Joe fans out here, I can tell already. So I'm going to hand this mic to Tim. But if anyone has any questions, please go ahead.
A question for each of you. First of all, was that shirt intentional, Tim? Because
Yes.
Larry's here?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. This is my Larry shirt.
Very
Bandit
nice.
the Vampire.
It's a deep
Told
pull.
you I was going to wear it. Yes.
And then second, I was just curious, Larry, you've mentioned before that you based a lot of the G.I. Joe characters on real people. I don't expect you to name names, but is there anything you can give us in terms of like what people in your life you were basing some of these characters on? Like, was it like friends? Was it work people or a mix of everything?
Well, they're people I actually know, friends, they're celebrities, famous actors, or they're people I served with. One of them was my cousin Randy. You know,
Wow.
I mean, the thing is, I'm not basing physicality on these people. I use my friends and acquaintances as touchstones for the character. And so, because I write everything page by page, I do not know what's on page 5 until I get to page 4. That's why there was in 155 issues of the Marvel G.I. Joe, there was not one coming attraction, because the editors had no idea what I was going to hand in next time. You know, and I like it to work that way because so many times I sit and I read something or watch something, and by the 3rd page or the first 10 minutes, I know the ending. You know, it's like it's so hard not to telegraph. But I figure if I don't know how it's going to end, then I can't telegraph it to the reader. And you know, it works so far because I deliberately try to put in a slight cliffhanger at the end of every page. You know, it's my way of making the reader turn the page. So in my comics, there's no what we call widows, you know, which are one panel from the continuity hanging over to the next page. The scene ends on the last panel of each page. You know, when I started doing G.I. Joe, I decided, okay, there were not going to be any thought balloons, and there were not going to be any captions, which in 1982 was anathema. I mean, you know, Marvel Comics was something like, you know, a third captions, you know, and they were all descriptions of what was already being drawn and seen. This was sort of a self-defensive thing on my part because I remember I had drawn a page of Iron Fist that I spent all day working on this background of the Himalayas with the clouds, you know, and the wind coming through the passes and all this stuff. And the writer covered up almost the entire background with 8 captions. And all the captions did was describe the artwork that was being covered up. And I thought, I was never going to use a caption like that again. I wouldn't do that to another artist. You know? And I guess it works.
Thank you.
Did I answer your question?
You answered more than my question. Thank you.
There was a lesson in there too. I learned something, so thank you.
Oh, is that over then?
Yes.
So, a question for you. We all know in the Hasbro toy line there were some pretty wild vehicle and figure designs. Did Hasbro ever come to you with something where you just kind of said no, or you had to kind of have it back and forth about how that could be incorporated into stories?
Well, you know, at first, there are some things I absolutely refuse to do. Like they, when the Star Wars movie with the Ewoks came out, the suits at Hasbro decided, oh, plush, you know, furry stuff. You know, we got to have like some sort of G.I. Joe furry. We'll call them the Dreadnoks, and there'll be these like, you know, giant teddy bears. You know, and I said, wait a second. You want the good guys to be shooting giant teddy bears? I mean, it's not going to fly, you know? I think I almost quit over that. But I eventually finally convinced them to turn the Dreadnoks into Aussie bikers. And
Which is just as close to teddy bears as you can get.
Yeah.
That was the right choice.
yeah.
You made the right decision.
And by doing that, I garnered a huge amount of free publicity for G.I. Joe, because right after the Dreadnoks and Zartan came out, Jay Leno was a guest on the Letterman show. And this was before he was a host himself. And his entire routine with his stint on the Letterman show was to hold up Dreadnoks, pack, you know, the carded figures and read, you know, with a feigned outrage because I was mocking, you know, bikers, which he considered himself a biker. But I don't know another single biker that considers Jay Leno a biker.
He's a certified Hell's Angel, man. He just he'll kill you.
Is that good?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this gentleman is a friend of mine. So you don't
You're both come from a background of art and writing, and fans often argue who's more important, the writer or the artist. And I was just wondering what your thoughts on the relationship of the two. Do you like your work best when you were both the writer and the artist? I was just
I know
wondering.
Larry's answer on this one. Go ahead, Larry. I want you to stop.
I refuse to categorize I don't identify as a writer. I never have. I started out drawing. I still consider myself a person who draws. I never called myself an artist. I think the word artist is an acclamation and an appellation. It is awarded to you. You cannot call yourself an artist. That is, you know, hubris. It is like calling yourself a poet. Somebody says to me, "Well, I'm a poet." I said, "No, you're not. You're somebody who rhymes shit." You know, when the people call you a poet, then you're a damn poet. But because anybody could call themselves an artist, is what they produce art. And I wouldn't go so far as to call what I do art. It just seems unseemly to me. And you know, to this day, most of my friends are the people that draw this stuff. You know, because every step of the way, my first ventures into the business, I was helped by artists. I was helped by Wally Wood. I was helped by Neil Adams. I was helped by Dick Giordano, Ray Morrow. You know, all these people were in my corner. All I got from writers was backstabbing. You know? So, you know, it's personal experience. What about you?
Well, Larry and I talked about this last night over beers, but I always thought that there's a sort of difference. If you draw and write your stuff, I would call you a cartoonist, right? Like, so R. Crumb and Frank Miller and, N. Stevenson, all these people who do the job. That's a different job than the monthly comic grind, which is one person writes a script and gives it to someone else, and often they don't talk. And so that's a different process. And I think when I can, if I write it and draw it, or if I collaborate with someone, like the way that I'm doing the book Local Man, where we talk about it and we both draw sections, I think they just turn out better. It's more about synthesis, which I think you don't want to have stuff that's at odds. And, you know, a lot of times in the Marvel DC method of people not really communicating, you have something that's at war, which Larry has experienced. You have the writer at war with the artist. And so sometimes it creates something interesting, but it doesn't create something synthesized. So I think, you know, when it's possible, unfortunately our system rarely lets us do it. And in fact, you know, I've been doing this for 20-some years now, and I've got to do it like on a few issues. I think The Local Man is the most I've gotten to actually write and draw the same thing. And that's 20 years. So, you know, it's a rare thing, but you know, some of the stuff that you're the most known for, the ones that you wrote and drew in issue 21, and the moments where it's synthesized and it's, you know, sort of, it's words and pictures together, and if you can be that person who puts words and pictures, it'll probably turn out better.
Well, you know, what I learned the most from was working with Wally Wood, because we would alternate scripting. I would write canon, and Woody would write Sally Forth for an arc each. And then we would switch. Then I would write Sally Forth, and he would write canon. And then when I wasn't writing something, I'd be using the swipergraph and, you know, doing layouts and stuff like that. The thing about working for either Wally Wood or Neil Adams is that all they ever asked of you was to draw a standard figure. 8 heads tall, and with good gesture and good acting. And once either of those guys inked it, it looked like All They Wore to Neil Adams. Because the power of what they did was mostly all in the inking. That's why, Wally Wood could actually overpower Jack Kirby. And he did. It was really wonderful. That was one of the most perfect combinations of pencil and inker ever. If you could look some of that stuff up, your eyeballs would be up. Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's rare though, because that kind of thing, the finisher, that's really kind of out of fashion as well, right? Most people kind of do everything now, so.
Or you have an inker who's sort of mostly just responsible for, line weights and spotting blacks. They're not finishing it, adding like a new veneer to it. It's kind of out of fashion in a weird way.
Well, that style of inking is no longer around.
Right, yeah.
Because and what killed that style of inking was Photoshop color. So when everything is modeled in the color,
Yeah, you don't need it.
dense blacks no longer make any sense. And that's why modern comic books look like they're so monochromatic. There's no contrast in the tonality. When you had processed color comics, you had incredible contrast. Stuff would really pop.
What's the power of limitation? When you have, using purple and green to make sure everybody knew this guy was a villain because those colors are secondary and they're complementary and they cause contrast. Like there's lots of limitations make innovation, I think, right? And if you have everything available, then you can kind of be lazy sometimes.
Well, that's the problem with Photoshop color. You got so much palette available to you that everything becomes a mixture, such a mixture of every color. That it all turns to mud. And I don't know if there's any real way to fix it. It's also that people that color are coloring on their computers, so they're seeing light, and that's not the way it's going to look on paper.
True. Any other questions? This is the time to ask. This is a great thing.
I guess I could ask for issue 21. Because you say you go kind of panel or page to page, was it always going to be a silent issue?
Oh yeah, because
Okay.
we didn't have, that was my idea because we had to get it out in 2 weeks. We couldn't spare the time to letter it because it would take a week to send it to somebody, get a letter, and get it back. This is before scanning and all that stuff. And I literally made up the story page by page as I went along. I got to the middle of the story, and there was a scene where both Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow ripped their sleeves. And I said, "Oh, their right forearms are exposed. What can I do with that?" So in Iron Fist, I had created a character called Lakon the Thunderer who had an I Ching hexagram on his breastplate. I said, that I Ching hexagram is a pretty powerful symbol. It's been around for 1,500 years. I'll put a hexagram on both of their forearms. And when I did that, I had no idea what the hexagram meant. I had no idea what it signified or how it linked the two characters together. I just established it as a common link between them. It's a mystery, that was a mystery to me. So, and like 5 issues later, number 26, I had to come up with why they both had. So the entire background story of those two characters is based on figuring out the mystery of why they both have this hexagram on their forearms. So that's how a lot of story stuff can begin by the necessity. It really is the mother of invention.
Well, you and I have talked about this too, because the way that you can do when you're writing and drawing something, that cartoonist thing is it's like improv, and in an improv they have this thing called yes and, which you never say no, right? When you're up on stage and someone says, you know, I'm a pink dinosaur, you don't go, no, you're not, because that's not funny, right? Like that kills the joke. So you just go, you know, yes and then that's a great way to cartoon, which is you just say, yep, and now I have to figure out why that is, and that's one of those things that long-running comics often have that works really good, is that it's a bunch of people figuring out random shit that may have not meant anything and putting meaning into it. And you come up with ideas that you might not have had there been an actual plan, you know?
Well, I think, you know, not being a writer really helped me, because, you know, I don't think of the stories in terms of words. To me, the dialogue and the words come dead last. The way I write is I try to picture the entire story as a sequence of images, and like a movie. I try to imagine this whole movie in my head, and then I sit down at a word processor and describe the images that I saw in my head. That's what all my plots are. So they come from the source of the root is the image and the movement between the images. Neil Adams once said that the whole magic of comics is imagining what's between the panels.
The gutter. Yeah.
So that's, you know, if you start from the rocking, socking image origin, then it's impossible to do 5 pages in a row of people walking down a corridor talking.
Right.
You know? Which, you know, when writers became transcendent in the industry, it all went to crap. You know, because they were writers. They thought of themselves as, you know, novelists or something. You know, they didn't think of themselves as, I'm writing pictures. I'm always thinking in terms of the picture telling the story. You know, I remember the first time I saw a Lone Wolf and Cub. I was in a Zen bookstore in New York, and I found Lone Wolf and Cub. This was before any of the translations happened, and I went, holy smoke, because I could understand everything that was going on without being able to read Japanese. You know? So I bought up every copy they had, and I brought it back to Continuity in 2 shopping bags, and I would sell them to other artists that came through for cover price for what I paid for them. And they were gone in a week and a half. The only people that bought them were people like Mike Kaluta, Jeff Jones, Barry Smith, you know, everybody that could actually draw and tell a story. All the pretenders weren't interested.
That's like a test. If you put Lone Wolf and Cub in front of someone, they don't want it.
Frank Miller, you know, all these guys, they all bought copies. And this was in the early 70s. Soon after that, you started seeing, you know, ninjas and stuff appearing in comics more often. The second time I went to Zen Books, I discovered a manga called Akira, the first issue. You know, and I went, holy smoke! And I bought up every issue they had of that. And I brought it back to Continuity, and they were gone in less than a week. You know. And maybe 20 years later, Otomo came to New York on a visit. And he stopped by my office, and he saw that I had that first issue of Akira on my bookshelf, and he took it down off the bookshelf and he opened it to the flyleaf, and he drew me a sketch of himself as a young boy on the flyleaf, you know. And then he said, "Well, you know, you don't have the good set of these things, you know." Like, I said, "Well, they're really hard to get here." You know? And about a month later, this huge box shows up at my front door from Tokyo, and it was a complete 28-volume set of the deluxe edition of Lone Wolf and Cub.
Nice.
Closest thing to hardcover you can get.
But so Larry is directly responsible for all the manga and then all the cosplayers. That's your fault.
Well, inadvertently.
Inadvertent.
I don't know if you guys noticed, but this whole line just disappeared.
Yeah.
It's so nice now
Yeah.
to have here. Before we move on to the next question, I want to ask you something. You mentioned a book, Local Man, which is a current book that you're working on right now. And if you guys aren't familiar with this, it grabbed my attention because I saw it sitting on the shelf, and it had the 90s feel to it, and it was a shiny cover, and I had to buy it. So can you kind of fill everyone in on Local Man right now?
Yeah, sure. It's a book I do at Image Comics with Tony Fleeks. The story is essentially that there's a guy who in the 90s was this sort of big corporate superhero kind of character, and he's been on this team for years, and they basically sort of just did things that looked cool, didn't really do anything good for the world, but then he does something, we don't find out exactly what it is immediately, but he does something terrible, gets kicked off, and he's also, they take away his costume, they take away his trademarks because he doesn't own them, and now he has to move back with his parents in Wisconsin. And so it's a sort of a midlife crisis story.
Yeah.
It's based on my own fear that I would be doing comics and it wouldn't be able to make it work and I'd have to move back to my hometown, which is, I think, just a primal, horrible fear. Like, one, admitting your failure, saying, doing something that you said you were going to do your whole life when I was a kid. Like, I'm going to be a comic book creator, I'm going to do it. And then do it, and then fuck it up. And that's like, that was a huge fear. So it turned into a comic, but it's a kind of a crime story. But it's also, it's kind of funny, but it's really dark also. But it's just about that sort of, the idea of what your potential is, and how people perceive potential. And as you get older, how no one ever describes your potential anymore because it's too late for you. And then just sort of that, this guy coming back to town that now hates him. Also, we kind of find out he's kind of this, coming back to his town. They're these forgotten people. It's a rural town in Wisconsin. Everybody's kind of pissed off because the world has passed them by, which you may be familiar with happening in your country right now. So it's got a lot of things going on. Also, there's crazy supervillains, and there's a guy based. If you're familiar, if you've ever been to Wisconsin, they have a festival called the Hodag Festival, which was a hoax perpetrated by a guy who took a bear skin and stuffed it and made a thing called a Hodag. And so there's a supervillain called the Hodag in our book, which is the most local thing you could possibly have, and no one on earth knew that it was unless they were from Wisconsin. So I'm very proud to make something inapproachable for everybody else.
It's a Wisconsin version of the Jersey Devil.
Yeah, yes, totally true. Because it was, and then this guy he had said that he'd shot at Wisconsin, and so brought all these people trying to find the Hodag. So it was just a stuffed blue bear skin.
So is Local Man an ongoing series?
Yeah, it's an ongoing series. Issue 5 comes out this week. I have some at my table. I'm probably not supposed to sell it, but whatever.
Did you ever resolve being a comic person with your parents?
My parents were super supportive.
Really?
I don't have the story of my character in any way because my parents, they both worked at like blue collar jobs. My dad was a welder. My mom worked at Kmart. And they were always super supportive of us doing comics. In fact, we didn't have a comic book store in my hometown. We had a grocery store that had some, and my mom found the nearest comic store, which was in Green Bay, Wisconsin, an hour and a half away. And so every 6 months, my mom would take us, mom and dad would take us to a comic shop. They would go eat at Red Lobster because that was a big deal. That was fancy compared to what I had in my hometown. They would eat at Red Lobster. They would give each me and my brothers $10, and we would spend the day or their lunch buying back issues, 10-cent books, So they were always super supportive. In fact, my only complaints by my parents was that they didn't tell me no. Sometimes I'm doing comics like, why don't you maybe be a fucking lawyer or something? But they, I never had, I think, what a lot of people did, and I know I'm very grateful that I had these very supportive blue collar parents. I mean, they easily could have been like, well, art is a really stupid thing to pursue, but they didn't. They should have. They did,
Well, I remember when I got my first monthly Marvel comic, the Iron Fist, I told my mom, and she said, oh, that's nice, but when are you going to get a real job?
Oh, man. I mean, I think almost everybody has that story. I mean, I think so many people, I know I'm unusual to have had sort of not only support, but my parents don't get it. For instance, so my dad, he's a mechanic, and he repairs like old chargers and stuff. So he had bought this 60-something charger, and he was working on it. So I drew him my character Cassie from Hack Slash with the charger that he was doing, and I sold it as pin up and stuff for print, and I put it in the book. But I gave him the original art, and I gave him a copy of the print. And I went back like this summer in May, and I go to my dad's shop, and a can of paint has exploded, and it covered that original art.
Oh.
And I was like, "Oh shit, how'd that happen?" And he said, "Well, it's no big deal. I saved the original." He holds up the print. I was like, "That's the original that was worth about $1,000 actually, and that print is worth about $1.50." He was like, "Oh, he had no idea. He didn't know he didn't have a concept what original was or anything. So they don't get it, but they're supportive."
We got about 10 minutes left. Any more questions? Go ahead.
Tim's shirt with Planet of the Vampires reminds me, as a kid, I was super excited over Planet of the Vampires, Wolf the Barbarian.
Yeah.
And
And
then
Atlas stuff.
after 2 issues, you were gone from it, and I was so disappointed.
Wasn't everybody gone for those books?
Yeah, and,
Pretty much.
And I was wondering if were you supposed to own those characters? Was that stolen away from you? You mentioned losing copyrights.
No, because it was good. Let me tell you what happened. Is that I was delivering a job to Marvel, and Howard Chaykin was standing on the sidewalk in front of the Marvel door, and he was directing people to go across the street, to work for Atlas. And I said, "Well, why should I do that? I got this cushy gig here." He says, "Well, first of all, they'll double your rate." I said, "Oh, okay." I'm there. Yeah, and they were able to get quite a roster. They got Neil Adams and Steve Ditko and
If you don't know the story of Atlas Comics, the origin is literally they're Spite comics.
right.
That is what they are. The guy was Mark Freeman, right? Mark
Goodman.
Goodman.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mark Freeman's from the office. Yeah, he had owned Timely and all this sort of stuff, and then it got bought, and he lost the Marvel part of it.
Right.
And so he said, "I'll destroy Marvel by making knockoff Marvel comics," sort of. With Larry and I were talking about this last night, the Atlas comics, because they were just chasing dollars and trying to punish Marvel, there was just no plan except, make them sell. And if this one didn't sell, the next issue was completely different. I remember the one Chaykin did, who went from a superhero to one of those Chaykin, angry Jewish spy guys. Remember that? Yeah.
Was it Dominic Fortune? Or
It was Dominic Fortune, but he became Scorpion.
Right.
Because he took Dominic Fortune over to Marvel, right? That was yeah. So that was Howard's thing. He made angry, also very horny Jewish spy guys. Still does. American flag and everything. But they were just trying desperately to punish, the new owners of Marvel. So you wrote those 2 scripts. And by the time you get to the 3rd issue, are they just like giving up, or what were they doing?
I can't remember. It was a while ago. Trying to remember what exactly happened there.
Because Planet of the Vampires is, I think, one of the best ones. I have all the Atlas comics. If you go looking for books, you can find Atlas books. They're a trip. Steve Ditko doing Tiger Man, and Tiger Man is like, there's no idea there at all. It's just a guy with a tiger head. There's no idea there.
I think what actually happened was I went off to be an actor. I had no intention of being an actor. At the time, I had hair down to my waist because some second lieutenant made me get a haircut on the last day I was in the Army, and I decided I was never going to get a haircut again. And he was like a second lieutenant. He had a national defense ribbon, and that was it. And so I was in an elevator in Manhattan, in the building that I lived in, which we serviced a lot of theatrical stuff. There were a lot of agents and voice coaches and stuff. And there was a woman in the elevator, and she turned to me and she said, "Are you an actor?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Do you want to be one?" And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" She said she was a producer, and she was producing a production of Moby Dick at the South Street Seaport, and she needed harpooners. And so I went and I read for the part, and I got the part. So I was Tashtego, the harpooner, and the other harpooner was Dagu, and that was my first experience, in theater. I sort of liked it, and somebody saw me in that, and I got another gig, and I think the third or fourth call I got was for a Stephen Sondheim musical on Broadway, and I called them back and I said, "Well, I don't know why you're calling me to audition for this. I neither sing nor dance." They said, "Well, we want to see you anyway." And I went and I auditioned and I got the part. Well, it's also the fact that I was a trained martial artist, and I knew all the formalities, how to bow, how to, do all the stuff, and I ended up having to coach all the other the actors and dancers on that stuff, and I ended up co-choreographing the sword fights with Sun Teko. So that got me into Actors Equity, and then when I was on the road with the show in Los Angeles, I got cast in a MASH episode, and that got me into what's it called, Screen Actors Guild. And then I started doing some voiceover stuff, and that got me into the other unions. So I've been a dues-paying member of SAG and AFTRA and Equity since 1976.
Are you on strike right now?
Yep.
I think we have another question over here.
Can you talk about the Hasbro approval process and what we were and weren't allowed to do, and if they ever said you wrote something and they said you can't do that?
Hasbro approval process. Did they ever tell you no?
No. I think they learned their lesson the first time I quit. It was like, well, actually, they fired me off the file cards because some new guy came in and said, "Well, why are we paying this guy Hama to write this stuff when we can have some kid in the office write the file cards?" And that lasted about a week. So they had to come crawling back and hire me back, and I said, "Well, that's nice, but my rate just doubled." That happened 3 times. And no, in all this time that I've been writing G.I. Joe, Hasbro never asked me to change a single word in all of that. So that's why I continue. I don't care if the pay rate is lousy. What I like about writing G.I. Joe is that it's like going home. I don't have to really think about it. I'm writing about my friends, literally. So it's very comforting to me. A lot of other stuff is stressful. I find working on G.I. Joe.
Did you break a record though? What issue you break the record of longest single writer on a series?
I have no idea.
Because I think it's you versus Dave Sim, I believe. So you're gonna have to. I don't remember how far he got. At least 300, but I'm not sure if he got farther than that.
Well, there's 304 Real American Hero issues, and then there's special missions,
Right. Yeah.
and annuals, and Impact comics, and probably another 100 or so other comics other than that. So it's over 400 G.I. Joe comics.
I believe you have the record, sir. I don't think there's anybody that's beat you on that.
Well, if I keep going, it'll be more cemented.
Yeah, there you go. Destroy all comers.
Let me ask you guys, did either of you have a collection of G.I. Joe toys?
Oh yeah, I did.
Okay, now let me ask the audience, how many of you guys had G.I. Joe toys? Now, how many of you guys have the USS flag?
Nobody has.
Nobody. Is there any way?
He has it, he has it.
He did, he does. Is there any way that you can get them to re-release the USS flag?
Well, the thing is, the way they'll do it, if you've seen those, the HasLab stuff, they'll do all the stuff like, that you want as a kid you can get, but it's all bigger.
Yeah.
So if they make the flag now, it'll be like the size of it'll be essentially a trailer home that you put your Joes in, and you have to like park it in a lot somewhere or something. It'll be huge.
Yeah, you have to build it on a Chris craft or something.
Yeah.
There's always a little guy. I actually saw one at a comic shop in Denver, still in the box. And it was like $4,000.
Oh yeah.
But,
Because also, the Master Universe had big play sets too, and I don't have them now because I live in a house and I have a wife and a kid, and I don't have them. But I read once that some of those big play sets, I don't know about the flag, but definitely the Master Universe Eternia one, which is kind of the equivalent, they actually only made like 400 to 600 of them. Because they were so expensive and kind of in line, I wonder how many flags there actually was.
yeah.
Because they were expensive as hell to make, and ship and everything else. So I have no idea, how many of those actually we can find production runs. Because like the actual average figure was like 30,000 or something, right? Like somewhere around there, the print run.
Yeah.
So
Well, you have to understand that G.I. Joe was never considered an action figure line. From the viewpoint of Hasbro, G.I. Joe was about vehicles. Okay, all their profit was from the vehicles. The figures were a loss leader. The figures were to Hasbro what hamburgers are to McDonald's. They break even on the hamburgers and they make all their money on the sodas and fries.
Yep.
So
It's like a movie theater, yeah. Same thing.
Exactly. So the action figures are the sodas and fries, and the vehicles are the hamburgers.
That's the Star Wars model, right? Like that's
Right.
how you figure it out, yeah. The figures are just your way in, and then you got to put them in some shit. So here's a $60 little car that you got to get mom and dad to get you.
And Star Wars is a good example of like the tail wagging the dog in a way, because when they made the first movie, there was they weren't thinking about toys licensed. So they designed all these spaceships that were almost impossible to
make toys out of.
Make toys out of. And when they realized, after that first Christmas season, they went, "Holy shit!
Yeah.
we're like spitting in our wallet." So,
They sold you a card saying, hey, your toys are on the way.
Yeah.
yeah, so so they you notice that from then on, all the spaceships were a lot easier to mold.
Yeah.
They're less concavities and less complexities.
Yeah, you couldn't have a giant Star Destroyer show up and totally.
Yeah. That would have been a great playset.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, gentlemen, Tim Seeley, Larry Hama, everybody, thank you so much for joining us here at Dual.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.